Yeah, it's the first time I did that on time.
Hmm?
I just want to acknowledge that I think that's the first time I clicked that at the right time.
You clicked it at the right time, though you're 2 minutes late. That's
Well,
fine. I know, but that's Jewish time. Greetings all. Um, we've had 2 weeks. We didn't have a session last week because it was Rosh Hashanah. And in those 2 weeks, I've had time to review the process of this series. This is the fourth series we've had since COVID. The first was 50 Words of Torah that resulted in a collection of 50 Words of Torah called Zoom Torah. And that's available as an ebook. And then the next 22 sessions were the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And so each of these was tightly contained. The first one was controlled by the calendar. So the word of Torah came out according to the Parshiot. And what we did then, we selected actually a single word from the Parsha that I allowed to select me. So still there was the essence of spontaneity in that I didn't determine ahead of time which word I would choose. Well, sometimes I had a suspicion that a certain word would choose me, and usually I was wrong. So as I would gaze through the text, the Hebrew text of the Torah, there would be something that leaped out at me, and I would keep staring at that word, wondering why that word, and then surrender to that word, and that became the lesson for that week. And we went into that word, and there were things that happened between me and the 25, 30, 40 people in the Zoom room. For the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, it was highly structured also, more structured even, because I knew the letters we were going to work with. I knew the graphic form of the letters. And there was actually a text from a scientist at MIT who wrote a paper on the graphic form of symbols and the wisdom contained within them. That it isn't simply the letters that are conveying wisdom, but the shape of the letters themselves, certainly in Hebrew, when the Hebrew alphabet of the written Torah is designed to carry divine wisdom. And so we would surrender to that to some degree. And lessons came out of that that were somewhat profound, and it became an ongoing mystery. If you look at that book, it reads like an adventure from Aleph all the way to Tav. Then we did Beyond Prayer. So for Beyond Prayer, we had a structured format. The structured format was the order of the Siddur. We didn't begin at the end of the Siddur. We began at the beginning when we got into the morning blessings, and then went to Psuke de Zimra, to the Psalms, and then on. And there was a lot of learning in that process about what doesn't work, what does work, what's gone awry as worship in the format of prayer. And that book is now out there. And it's not an easy sell, that book, because what it's doing is trying people to get people to change the way in which minyanim and leaders of prayer operate. My agent used to tell me I write unpopular characters. And she was right. I chose people who weren't particularly empathetic or sympathetic, and made the reader work to penetrate them. If any of you have read the Moshe Katan trilogy, he isn't a particularly challenging guy. He was knowledgeable about the Kabbalah and shares a lot, but you have to struggle with this guy because there are some things to like about him, but some things really not to like. And sometimes I make him the ancillary character to a different protagonist. Now, this series is more difficult than anything that we've tried so far. And in the last 2 weeks, I've had the opportunity to consider where stories come from. Those of you who know my writing probably know it mostly through the stories that are widely translated and widely used, and that's how this fellow found me through my stories. And those stories came through me rather than from me. And we've been creating stories here. Now, in the course of an hour, stories come out, but the stories aren't fully formed. They're nascent stories, um, much like Buber himself. These stories here are freeze-dried stories. They're very short. Buber put into words only that which was necessary to take out, put into water, and then let expand into a full Agnon type story. If you're familiar with the writings of Agnon, that's what Agnon does. Agnon takes one of these stories and expands it. It develops the character, develops the scene, the narrative, but the essence of that story is in that tiny paragraph. Now, what's interesting is the editor of Buber is Schocken. Schocken edits all of Buber's work. The editor of Agnon, the Nobel Prize winner, Schocken also. In other words, they're in the same category. And I realized what Agnon is doing. He's taking a existing Hasidic story and letting it blossom. So I've gone back and looked at my own work, and my own work also came out of a process somewhat akin to what we're doing right here. Now, mind you, I'm a story writer, and that's a very individual talent. Not all of us are story writers. Our creativity will expressed in each of us in its own individual way. One of the questions then is, since this is an individual process, what do I need you for? I can sit in my study and write a story. But when I look back at my published stories, I realize that's not how it happened. I did not just sit there and write a story. The story came about because I told it to a community. I told it to a community because the community demanded a story for a particular moment, and that the story was the best way of teaching that I had. And so the story somehow erupted, came through me, and without the community, there wouldn't have been any story. So, what kind of community are you? Well, we got 3, 4, 5, we got a half dozen actually living flesh and blood people here in the room. And a relatively small number on the Zoom screen. I think we're having real hard time getting word out about these sessions that they're occurring. I don't know quite why that is. Also, they may be so strange that people take a couple of sessions and then say, we'll wait for the next series if they come back at all. I don't know. What happens is you are there, and light is reflected back off the screen. So the fact that I have a responsibility to a community takes me down to a deeper level. And because of that responsibility and descending to a deeper level, I descend, if you like, to the place where stories can find me. And I'm a good receiver for stories. You may be a good receiver for a documentary. You may be a good receiver for a piano composition. You may be a good receiver for better parenting, or as a diagnostic physician, or a scientist who is trying to penetrate a mystery. I'll share with you an extraordinary workshop that happened at one of the National Havrai Institutes. An institute is a gathering of 300 or 400 people for a week, usually on a college campus in the Northeast. And this is the trans-denominational, transgenerational creative leadership of the Jewish people. And anybody is welcome. If you are there, you are the creative leadership of the Jewish people, because you're bringing what it is that you're bringing. And they had a workshop for scientists only. Well, I wasn't a scientist, but I'd spent a couple of years at MIT. So I begged my way in, and they said, don't say anything, just listen. So I expected that what I would hear was the process of creation explained in scientific terms or something like that. That's not what I heard at all. They all had the same question. They were all scientists, well respected in their fields, and they had all discoveries of one sort or another. And they all wanted to know where insight came from. They wanted to know how that happened. They wanted to be able to put themselves in the way again, and that way again. And we didn't explore it, and I kept quiet. But one thing I will bet is this, that their insight came about as a wrestling match with a community. It's the difference between praying alone and praying with a minion. With a minion, you have all those interactions and a network and a foundation from which to dive deep. And a good minion, a supportive minion. So welcome, you are a minion. And I'm going to begin with a story. And I'll tell the story. And we'll take a look at where that story comes from, and then we'll see if we can create yet a new one, or put ourselves in the way of a new one. The title of the story is To Dwell in the House. You might remember Marion Morgan came up with Psalm 27 last time. And then there was we opened to a page of Buber, which was a confusing one or two liner about the Baal Shem Tov reproving a disciple who was proud about his prodigy son. So if you were with us last time, you recall this. Here's a story. The disciple's son, young as he was, could answer Torah questions that might have puzzled scholars. And his father burst with pride. The Baal Shem Tov saw this. Indeed, the boy was a prodigy, but pride? When he was alone with his disciple, he remarked, I see how proud you are of your son. He is indeed remarkable, but your pride is overwhelming everything else for which you might be proud. Other than your son, what are you proud of? The disciple thought and said, his wife. She was remarkable, not only the way she cared for the children in the household, but she too was exceptional in Torah. And what after your wife, the Baal Shem Tov asked? Well, my younger children, each of whom showed promise for his or her age. And then, well, my students that I have so many and they stay close to me. And then my house that I have such a beautiful house. And then my community, my minion that welcomes me each day. And then of the songs I sing as I walk to shul. And then that I'm blessed to have fine and appropriate clothes. And then that I can care for my family and myself. And then the disciple was silent. The Baal Shem Tov continued, are you proud that you have ground to walk on? Are you proud that there is a sun to illuminate your path? Are you proud that the earth turns on its axis? Consider, what is the smallest thing you might be proud of? And with that, the disciple's silence became deeper, and deeper still, until he disappeared and was no longer mindful of himself. After an unknown period of time, he heard a faint and familiar tune, Achat Sha'alti. One thing I ask from Adonai, one thing I do request, to dwell in his house. He came back mindful that he had descended so deeply, he had dwelt in that house, that he had bathed in the presence, and slowly he came back to awareness. He did so with gratitude for the ground beneath his feet, and for the sun above, and for the constancy of the earth rotating on its axis, with gratitude for his clothing and his walking and his ability to sing, with gratitude for a community and minion that welcomed him without reservation, with gratitude for children who were healthy and growing, and for his wife who tolerated him through all these years. and with gratitude for a son who was a prodigy, who would open for him, in other words, other worlds of Torah. Well, that's what we did last week. Now, there isn't anything added to what we did last week, other than the fact that we took the encapsulated form of the story as it developed last week, put it in water, and allowed it to expand. Agnon would have done it better. After all, he won a Nobel Prize. But Diane King read the story and recognized that it's similar to one of my stories in The Curse of Blessings. It is indeed similar. It follows the same progression, but it's different. It's different because it was there. It was a sense of entitlement over a sense of gratitude. Here, it explores the notion of ga'ava, the notion of pride, and that casts it in a different light. If I were putting together a collection of stories, I could publish only one of them. But putting together a new collection, this story is getting close to publishable. You decide, the power of that story. Actually, my editor will. So now the question is, yes, this is an individual process, but not quite. It began with a point from one person and with a story selected at random by another person, and then a bit of chavruta and wrestling, and either verbal feedback from the people who were in the room or on the screen, or the reflected light that comes back off the screen, or my responsibility to the people who were on the screen. And the story began to emerge, that there was something there of worth, which becomes its own entity. That entity, may exist for a week or two, or you might tell it to a few people or such, or it could dissolve and disappear. But occasionally there'll be a story that comes to the surface and remains there. And if you're lucky, two things happen. One is the story gets repeated by other people in your name. And if it's published, you collect the royalties. And the other is the story is told so often, people forget who wrote it, and they attribute it to that great author, Anonymous. And that's the greatest compliment of all, because when it's written by Anonymous, it's essentially eternal. Shlomo Carlebach used to share with me that he had written 500 tunes. Most of them were anonymous. And people have forgotten he had written them. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. That's Shlomo. Who knows that's Shlomo? That's written by Anonymous, isn't it? No, Shlomo Carlebach wrote that. Bless him, a teacher. Okay, any questions from that process? Because we're in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We're going to need a kavanah, and we're going to need to select a story, and we've set the tone, and we'll see what happens. Anybody have a kavanah, a question, a concern? We can have several of them and then select between them, but we do need one. Thoughts? What's on your mind? What's happening this week that raises to a level of concern? What's worthy of addressing? If you were a rabbi, what would your Kol Nidre sermon be about? Is that
Well,
E.T. raising your hand?
yeah. How about, the uncontrollable nature and the hurricane effect? We just have no control over it. We can predict it, we can see it, we can follow it. We can't control it.
Wow. Yes, I have the feeling that's on our minds quite a bit, especially as we're getting reports of increased fatalities from Lee County.
Yeah,
It's
who
not
shall live and who shall die? That's a scary prospect.
Well, that's two different things now. One is hovering on the razor blade of life, as Tom Lehrer would say, sliding down the razor blade of life. If any of you remember Tom Lehrer, who shall live and who shall die. And the other is the uncontrollable element of nature. So that's two different points. Would you like to choose one or the other?
Well, why don't you choose? What makes you excited about the topic?
I'm not excited about either one, E.T. Choose one of them.
Okay, uncontrollable nature.
Very good. We need somebody to select a volume and a page. Now, a page number will go, like from the 40 or so up to 300 or so in either volume 1 or volume 2. So a volume and a page number. Go ahead.
Volume 3.
Volume 2?
3.
There is no volume 3. And that's not fair. Yeah.
Next. Volume 2 then, and page 140.
Page 140. I gotta let you know, I've read it because I've read the entire book, but I didn't memorize which story was on which page.
You don't know?
Hmm?
You don't know?
I don't know. I once had a teacher who gave me an exam, a history teacher, who said, summarize chapter 5 of this book.
There's the pin test in Yeshiva?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
The pin test is, go ahead, explain what a pin test is.
When you have a page of Talmud, they would stick a pin in one of the letters, and you would have to say the letter that the pin went through on the other side of the page. And it's like it would test photographic memory of the whole pages. And like random pages, random pin. Yeah. I never succeeded. Just in case that was a question.
We have a short story. We have a long story and a short story. The long story is not that long. Let's do the short story.
It's a better title.
Hmm?
It's a better title.
Well, the renewed soul.
Appropriate for.
Certainly appropriate for our time. Now the question is, how does it tie in to the uncontrollable forces of nature? So you have two data. The singular data is datum. I know this because that's an important term in anti-submarine warfare. How I know about anti-submarine warfare, I used to do that. You get one ping on a submarine from a destroyer, and that ping is a datum. That means at that moment, that submarine was there. Well, that doesn't tell you much because the submarine is moving. You need one more datum to establish data. And once you have data, then you get a track. So we have one datum says uncontrollable nature, and we have one datum, and one datum is this. When Rabbi Hirsch once said to his Hasidim, I don't know who Rabbi Hirsch is. When a man rises in the morning and sees that God has returned his soul to him and that he has become a new creature, he should turn singer and sing to God. My holy master, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, had a chassid who, whenever he came to the words in the morning prayer, my God, the soul you have placed in me is pure, danced and broke into a song of praise. Okay, that's the story. Shall I read it one more time?
Yes, please.
And then we'll consider those 2 points, and we'll take some moments for Chavruta study in pairs, and for a few minutes, and see if some relationship between the story and such begins to occur to you. Now, you don't look. It isn't a rational relationship you're looking for. It's what's hard to grasp, what surfaces, to surrender to the story, holding in mind your anchor of, the announced covenant. When a man rises in the morning and sees that God has returned his soul to him and that he has become a new creature, he should turn singer and sing to God. My holy master, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, had a chassid who, whenever he came to the words in the morning prayer, my God, the soul you have placed in me is pure, Elohai nishmati shenatata bi tihurahi, he danced and broke into a song of praise. So we have uncontrollable nature, hurricane howling, fellow who wakes up in the morning and this is his discipline. Go learn.
But before we split up, Diane, you have your hand raised.
We have a hand raised, yes. Who asks?
I'll wait until we reconvene. I had some thoughts just based on the Kavanah and the title of the story, just immediate thoughts, and then some
So-
additional ones.
So let's do them in Chavrusa.
Yes,
Okay, and then we'll gather again.
okay.
So you're allowed to prepare.
We'll do, what are you going to say, 6 minutes? 6 minutes?
6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay.
You're going to be paired with somebody, I hope.
Yeah, everybody's paired. Who's going to monitor this? All right, go ahead.
Go learn.
Yeah, sure.
All right, Marty, come on, man.
Is it Daniel and me? Does that answer your question about individuality, community, and creativity? That was the essence of the sermon. In essence, the way I'll begin on Wednesday is, if you existed when I was 25, 26 years old, I wouldn't be me. You would have screwed everything up. You would have provided a community in which I could fit. It was because I didn't have a community in which I could fit that I stepped outside the lines. That's weird, isn't it?
It all happens as it should.
It was the loneliest time of my life. It was. I had this notion that the way in which you write a novel is you hold yourself up in a garret apartment in an old mansion. You get a ream of paper and a manual typewriter, and you punch out 100,000 words. And I did it. And I would go to the grocery every day just to interact with somebody. I was ashamed because one ream of paper was going to be enough, and I could go to the book stationery store and buy another one. And I looked at all the synagogues, met with the rabbis, and finally, out of despair, went back to Berkeley to see if I would fit in there. But this was Berkeley, and I was. They accepted me. They knew I was still the old humor magazine editor they had known, but I wasn't. And then I met Shul Weiss, this great conservative rabbi. I didn't know he was great. And realized this just utterly lost. Went to Israel, see if I could get found. In Israel, I fit right in. So strange. That's a long time ago, 50 years. Not quite. Close enough.
What was your first stop when you got to Israel?
Say it again, please.
What was your first stop when you got to Israel?
First,
Stop.
well, the airport was Lod back then, and going through immigration, and I didn't know that I was entering citizen. I had an A1 visa, and they took down my name as Mitzvah Spitz, and they gave me, 10 pounds, and I think I stayed at I got on a bus for Beersheba, and from Beersheba to Arad, and got off the bus in Arad. There was nothing around except desert, camels, and Wally. And Wally was more attractive than any of the other two. And, there must have been 60 or so people in I forget what they called it, in the cycle, in the Machzor. And I got immersed in an Orthodox environment and Jewish studies. It was new to me, but not really strange, because I'd had exposure to the Orthodox community before. I didn't know anything. Learned fast. And that was 5-6 months. Then we came back to the States to get married, and then I began I'd applied to Hebrew College on spec, that I might want to be a rabbi. I got accepted while I was in the program. And then we went back to New York, where I began my studies. And then after a year, when Wally was very lonely, she began studying for a master's degree at NYU in occupational therapy. And our life went on. So community was hugely important. I don't have that sense of community at Beth David. Now Bruce, who's on the screen, has become a friend. We had lunch together today.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
And, I came in as an outsider, was he a rabbi, wasn't he a rabbi? I didn't know conservative Nusach. The few things they asked me to do came out strange. Mind you, powerful, but strange. But then again, it's not a dancing, hugging, embracing place. Hiya, are we back together?
I'm more curious. I'm just curious if we can look at the text.
What you got?
We can look at the text.
You want to look at the text? Is that fair that we let people look at a text?
Only because they're still in their breakout.
That's at the
they're
bottom.
coming back.
Okay, we got people coming back.
I was like right in the middle of saying something, and I hit the thing I thought I was going to make the thing go away, but I think it brought me back into here. So it was like mid-sentence, and the little pop-up said, 1 minute, you're going to be back in the main room.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, you will be.
And I am.
I love it. It gives me a great joy to see that.
I have a lot of thoughts for programming. I have a lot of thoughts for programming.
Mid-sentence, Wally.
You can, okay.
I'll have to work on it.
Whatever you were saying, of course, all of you was correct. You have some thoughts?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I am.
I have many thoughts. I have many thoughts, but before I speak, does anybody wait? Diane, you had your hand raised before, so I want to give you the opportunity to share or say.
So my initial response to uncontrollable forces of nature, the renewed soul, the two pieces of datum that you gave us, was after an uncontrollable event, our only option is to renew our souls and continue and move forward. That was the connection that I made between the Kavanagh and the title. And the singing and the dancing, again, saying the morning prayers, again, is gratitude for having been given another day. So the survivors of the hurricane, you listen to the interviews with them, how they're grateful for having survived, and they're moving forward to rebuild. So
Okay.
when we're confronted with the uncontrollable, we just have to take what has happened and do our best as we can, and for however long it takes to rebuild and move forward.
Any other reports from the learning peers? Yes.
Yeah, so Diane, we came up with the same thing with Moda'ani, and just the joy, and that's the dancing. So saying Moda'ani, and then when you get to the soul you've given me, these are opportunities to just be joyful, to be very alive, grateful. And if you're that joyful, you should be dancing and happy that you are alive again. And we also talked about the idea of 100 blessings a day is like every single moment of life it should be so easy to make 100 blessings, So yeah, that was our take on it.
Other reports? Please, a loud voice.
Yeah, we structured the story into two parts. One where the rabbi commands the singing or the rejoicing of the returning of the soul, and then the second part where a Hasid, an example of who heard this, is being described as somebody that's always joyful despite the natural events. So it seems like he takes something that's unnatural, uncontrollable, and he makes it mundane by always waking up and singing positively despite what is uncontrolled in his life.
Did you see it again? The difference between the two sections, is that you reported?
Yeah.
Do you study Talmud? Are you a Talmud student?
Not really, not particularly. No,
Okay.
not at all.
You're not a Talmud student yet. Okay. There's a difference between learning a Hasidic tale and learning Talmud. Talmud, you have to understand every sentence before you get to the next sentence, because it's a chain of logic. And if you haven't followed the sentence that goes before, you can't follow that current sentence. In the Hasidic teaching, it's playing over you. it's as if you're playing a piano piece and your teacher says, yeah, you didn't get it quite right, keep going. And then as you keep going, you understand how you can go back and reinterpret that phrase. But you first,
So,
hi there. It was a delight watching the two of you. I mean, sitting there, poring over the text and seeing it and taking the book and re-examining it. Now, do you have any thoughts to share?
yeah. So we had a lot of points because also we were talking about Yom Kippur. So it was Yom Kippur. I'm throwing in another datum point, but so it was Yom Kippur and the story and the hurricane and mortality. There's like a lot of stuff actually. Each one carries with it a lot of pieces. But the connecting thread that like really struck me very hard was this idea of total lack of ownership and control over everything and anything. So the joy that the chassid has when he wakes up and like that prayer of Moda Ani, of immediate gratitude, is appreciating of life and this gift of the soul and all the things that come with that. But at the core of it, there's a recognition that the soul is not actually ours to begin with, that we get to experience what it means to have a soul and be here. And Yom Kippur is also that, is recognizing that, and also the storms and also all the things of what it means to be in the world, is that we're like completely, and it actually leads us right into Sukkot. I'm sorry for
Say it again, please.
It leads us right into Sukkot. Like that's actually part of the connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And why is Sukkot so close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? It's like, it's the vulnerability of the Sukkah. It's recognizing that all of this is, we're incredibly at the whims of however everything unfolds. And after we go through this renewal and this rebirthing and all of the things that come with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we surrender to the complete instability and vulnerability of the Sukkah.
But Sukkah is also joyful and family and gratefulness and bringing the harvest and everything that we have. That
Yeah, it's Man Simchatenu. There's joy in that vulnerability, and in it's the same joy actually. It's the same joy of the gift of having a soul and being able to experience the world, and this joy that he wakes up with and everything that comes with Moda Ani. It is Sukkot. It's the same. They're one and the same. It's the same joy of recognizing that we are completely at the surrender of all that we experience, but also everything that we experience is like an incredible gift that we get to experience all of it in all of its facets and complexities. It's a very yeah, it's very beautiful.
So I would summarize it as a movable feast.
Tell me more. Tell me, movable feast, develop that, please.
Oh, well, because of the temporariness of the sukkah, and because of the harvest, I'm kind of working on what people have shared here. That life, as the teshuvah, we go through teshuvah, and then we hit the vulnerability. And if we step back and look at it on a bird's eye view, overarching theme is all of life is a movable feast. We just we try to roll with it and be grateful. But ultimately it is a feast. Feasting at the harvest at this time of the year, but then metaphorically, all of it, without judging if it's good or bad. It's just all a cornucopia, a feast.
Mm.
Can I say
Yes,
something?
please.
So I've been thinking lately about analog and digital. Are those sort of opposites? Because I think, I don't know, the digital is like being in the moment of gratitude And analog is like having everything's flying at you, and you can't handle it or can't accept. I don't know. It's just that I know that it might sound strange, but and I was trying to remember when, Mitchell, you were saying what was the turning point for the Hasid of singing and running, walking, and being grateful. And just now when you were talking, I felt that that is going from like analog to digital or to something different way of seeing.
Wow.
And like, I'm going through something really, really difficult right now with my body. And it is so much like what you're talking about, because it's like every day I should not feel analog. I should feel digital. I could feel the abundance and the movable feastiness of life. But instead I'm thinking of all the crap that I have been dealing with. And it's like waking up to but not having your house in Fort Myers Beach and what they're dealing with. And so it's really a mindset.
Let me take some of the things that I've heard, harvest them, and see if out of this we can create a tale that captures, encapsulates, and that might be expanded. The Hasidic story comes in two parts. Let's imagine that the first one is misnaged. The first one is exacting in the practice of Jewish law. How do we derive this? A man rises in the morning and sees that God has returned his soul to him and he has become a new creature. He should. As soon as you have the word should, it is an obligation that doesn't come from within himself, it comes from outside of himself. So it's an obligation that he's taken on himself, that he will recite these words and he will sing to God, my holy master. That is the first of them. But then the next one, my holy master, Menachem Mendel, did it differently. The first one is, as Wally said, a little bit differently now here. It would be digital, it would be quantum theory, it'd be wave or a particle. So he is saying it as part of a particle. Okay, this is the particle that comes up of the 613 commandments. This is the one that I attend to, and I will say the words, and I will dance, and I will do what is required of me. But Menachem Mendel, a Hasid, now notice this time it's saying it's a Hasid. That means he's part of wave theory. He's going with the flow. That whenever he came to the words in the morning prayer, the soul you have placed to me is impure, spontaneously, he danced and broke into a song of praise. So for one, it's pointillism, and for the other, it's the flow of a watercolor. Now we'll see, how this works. There's in one place there is we have two neighbors. One is a misnagid, one is a Hasid. They're both observant, each in their own way. There is a warning of a hurricane. It's going to be a natural disaster, and they hunker down. That's the first time I've used that in the whole day. And they hunker down, and the storm passes all night, and they have a sense from what they hear that there's huge destruction going on, and they're fearful for their very physical existence. And the winds subside. The winds subside, and morning breaks, and one of them immediately turns to do Modeh Ani Lefanecha and says, well, I have this prayer to say, and I will say it, and I should become a singer and sing to God. You can imagine what a song sounds like. Well, the other one has been doing this every day of his life. The other one, when things are good, he wakes up when he recognizes that he is born again with a pure soul. This is a reborn, it's a rebirthing. His soul has been polished. When he went to sleep at night, he sang Adon Olam. He said, B'yadcha avkid ruchi, into your hands I commit my ruach, which is second order soul, and with my soul, my body too. And if I should die before I wake, I pray to God my soul to take. And then when he wakes up in the morning, I acknowledge, that my eye has come back together with all these relationships, and my soul is no longer a ruach, it's been polished into a neshama, a deeper, pure level of soul. And out of this, he breaks into pure joy and spontaneously sings. Now, since he does this every day of his life without regard to anything that goes on around him, when those things have been going well in his life, it's easy to do. When those things are not going well in his life, it doesn't take a great natural disaster to have a catastrophe. Bad things happen, things that are disruptive. There's illness, there's death, there's loss. But nonetheless, the first thing that happens when he wakes up is he goes with that flow, recognizes that on this particular day, his soul has been reinvested into space and time, and it is his to do something with it. Whether the world outside of him has become smaller or the world outside of him has been enhanced, it is his task to find what it is for him to do in the world that day. And so all night he is thankful that his body has survived the storm. He has a sense of the destruction there will be when he goes outside, and the loss and the catastrophe and the realignment that will have to take place. But not out of speculation, he says, my soul is pure, it's been returned to me. Now, let me go out into this world and see what there is that I can do for you. And it's either way, it's a moment of great joy for him. Now, that's not quite a story, but we have the elements of a story there.
What makes it not a story?
It isn't a story, and it has the kernel of a story. But you heard a story that I read at the outset. There was power in the expansion of that story. Now there are all the ingredients here. That's essentially, it's the form of the narrative. It's a story that needs work so it can be told properly. Now, it's
like a soul. Like a soul.
Like a soul needs work. So I'll finish with my favorite story of Wave and Particle. Bruce is a world traveler. Is Bruce on the screen? Vicky is. He's not on the screen. Vicky, have you been to Florence? Hands up if you've been to Florence. You can just give me a thumbs up.
Times.
Yes, you've been to... Okay. Our travel agent was Marshall Harris of blessed memory. Okay, you know him. And we had one trip to Europe. And I told him to spend our money well. And he did. He rented us an Alfa Romeo in Tuscany, bless him. And he told us at the outset, when you get to Florence, there's this restaurant to go to. It's a wonderful restaurant, but there are no reservations, and it's always a very long line. So what you do when you go to this restaurant, one of you stands in line, and the other one goes around the corner where there's a wine store. They'll have a bottle of white on ice for you. And you get the bottle, you have him open it, he'll give you a whole bunch of paper cups. When you get back to that line, hand out paper cups to the people in front of you. And by this time, there are going to be people behind you. And hand out paper cups to the people behind you. Pour wine for everybody. By the time you get into the restaurant, everybody will be feeling good. Nobody will be counting all the particles ahead of you, chafing at the bit, waiting to get in. And since it's communal seating, you have family to sit with.
Very nice.
That was the wisdom of Marshall Harris. So one of them, if you like, was analog, the other is digital. One of them is quantum wave theory, the other is particle theory. The line is the same. It's your choice how to do it. And the other part of this story as it's developed is the discipline of saying this every day, whether it's good or whether it's bad, that one wakes up with a pure soul, not knowing what the world is going to be, but ready in partnership with the divine to greet it. So as the story develops, that gets emphasized. For the wine or the line, anytime you're in line, you're in a line of traffic. If you're in a line of traffic, you can choose to be a particle and honk at the cars ahead of you. There are 6 cars ahead of you, and the guy way at the front isn't moving fast enough, so you honk. Okay, you're a particle, honking at all the other particles. The other is, hey man, we're all in this together. Relax. Have a look at the world about you. Look, your car is stopped. It's not going anywhere. Have a look to the right. What do you see? Look on the freeway. What do you see there? There's a rock, there's a boulder, there's a tree, there's a plant. Wow, there's a whole world out there. Oh, I'm moving again. How nice. Now, it takes real discipline to get to the place where you can approach a line which could be inconvenient as part of the flow rather than as an independent particle. That brings us to an hour.
Can I say something?
You surely may.
Okay, so I see the story having a different ending. And the Hasid goes out into the street because his house was not hurt so much, but other houses were. And he gets out there and he's sort of happy to be dancing. And the man who was the other guy, the Hasid turns into me. Okay, so I'm dancing. And I see, in the distance, I see E.T. And I say to E.T., let's dance. Because I remember dancing with you about 40 years ago at a Havara Torah experience. And we were actually doing like arm in arm circles of dancing. And that's what I remember. And that was, so I wonder if we could take this Zoom and then I would like to ask Mark to dance because we were in the story just now. We were in this, the breakout room with.
I tell you what. Let's stop recording. That way we can all get up and dance, and not be embarrassed.
Because this way, you're talking about being in relationship to others. You know, I mean, we can't really do that so much here. Maybe you all
Why can't we do it?
But
Why
if-
can't we do it?
If you're in the space you are, you have other people there. You could do it.
Yeah, we got a few people, but we see you and you can see other people. Hey, if you're
But,
able
you
to get
know,
up in
I
the
had
field,
the same ending as Wally. And I'm glad you said it, because I was just holding it in. Where the chassid goes out and he sees all the destruction and he's dancing because he's alive. And then he sees the misnagim and he's like, oh, Baruch Hashem, you're still alive. And he grabs him and he starts dancing with him.
That's good.
well, it still needs refinement. And I've got 2 or 3 days to work on it. That's about it, because we tried to get this summary out by Wednesday.
So in terms
Well,
of
it's
What else
communicating.
do I have to do? I got Yom Kippur. What's the big deal?
Yeah, it's a way of communicating and becoming a community and, you know, enjoying and sharing the joys of life with someone else.
We got to find a way of dancing on Zoom
In the metaverse.
in the metaverse. Oh my God, to talk about metaverse.
So maybe in the end, it's about not sweating the small stuff.
Don't worry, be happy.
Well,
So,
Jimmy pointed out it's taking a risk when you're dancing.
I'll tell you how we used to end Nila. We used to end Yom Kippur. We used to end the fast in the Chavra, following a Hasidic model. And then at Temple Israel, when I was a rabbi, at Temple Israel, they cautioned me. We would do Yizkor late in the afternoon because that was the only way you could get people back to the synagogue. So they said, after you do Yizkor, make sure all the doors are locked. That's what Nila means. So they can't get out because everybody will rush home after Yizkor. And I said, no, don't do that. I said, we'll do a profound Yizkor. It will be profound. And but you'll leave the doors wide open. And I said, I made this announcement before Yizkor. I said, you know, we're going to do a profound Yizkor as a community. And if you want to leave after that, you may. On the other hand, for Nila, we're going to be dancing with the angels. And if you would like to dance with the angels, you're welcome to stay. Nobody left. And we did Nila standing, which wasn't the custom. And the tunes became joyous and more joyous as we went through. And what was the premise? The premise was this: is either you're in the book of life or you're not. If you're in the book of life, rejoice. If you're not, go out happy. We did, and there was snake dancing and a classical Reform congregation, and that's how we finished Yom Kippur. With joy. So I wish you all well over the fast. Gamal Chatima Tova.
Mer Chatima Tova.
Kumar Hatima Tova.